Why hello there friends, it's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. Welcome to my October reading vlog. The Boo to You Readathon has begun. The leaves are just absolutely gorgeous, so beautiful, as much as I can. Every nice day I've been trying to just get outside and enjoy the colors. I've been getting in some last kayaking before the weather gets too cold. I love kayaking in the autumn because you just, drift underneath these like such vivid, bright, golden and red branches, and the leaves are all drifting in the creek around you, and it's just kind of magical. But of course, getting in some lovely fall reading is another great way to enjoy the season, and that is what the Boo to You Readathon is all about, with some Disney magic sprinkled in. If you haven't yet, you can check out my announcement and TBR video for Boo to You. I have a co-host this year, the lovely Anne. We're going to be filming a kind of Disney nostalgia Boo to You Readathon chat later this month, which you'll probably have already seen. It will already have gone up. That should be lovely. But I've had quite a good start to the month. The challenges for the Boo to You Readathon this year are based on the original ticketing system at the Magic Kingdom, and that used A, B, C, D, and E tickets to kind of divide up the rides. I have been reading Mary Poppins Opens the Door for my A ticket. I've been taking the tickets in order. So A tickets were kind of the most general, sort of lowest tier rides, but still fun. I picked this based on Cinderella's Golden Carousel, I think it was called. See, look at this. We've got the leaves drifting down. I'm a little worried though. There are some like giant, I'm not sure if they're apples or walnuts, some large and heavy projectiles hanging from that tree. So I'm hoping none of them will fall on me. Just the gentle leaves, please. Thank you. Anyway, I've never read the Mary Poppins sequels, and I thought it'd be really fun to do that. This cover, it has leaves drifting across, just like we have right now. I had mentioned I wasn't sure if I should go back and reread the original Mary Poppins, the first book, which I have read, before I went into the sequels. And one of you guys mentioned in the comments that, they're not really chronological, so you don't need to do that, and you were totally right. Like the original book, each chapter is its own story, its own little vignette, and like the Banks children haven't even grown up very much. They're just about the same age, so the order doesn't really seem to matter. One of the chapters, one of the vignettes was totally Little Mermaid. Like, I wonder, I'm not sure if this must have come out before The Little Mermaid, the movie, but I almost wonder if the under the sea scene was based on this chapter, because it is so, right down to like all the different species of fishes and what instruments they play. It's just such an amazing under the sea party that Mary Poppins and the Banks children go on. There are also peppermint horses, which are pretty extraordinary. My favorite chapter, though, was probably the cat who speaks to the king, and I did read that to Cymbeline, or attempted to. My kitten, she doesn't really stay still, ever. Like when she's asleep, but like she'll never sleep when you're there, because when you're there, there's a chance she can play and pounce. So, but I'll probably try to upload that on Cymbeline's YouTube channel the same day I post my reading vlog. Yes, there's the illustration for the cat who looked at the king. This has the original illustrations in it, which is so great. The book starts not in October, but in November, on the 5th of November. It was one of those bleak and chilly mornings that remind you winter is coming. Cherry Tree Lane was quiet and still. The mist hung over the park like a shadow. All the houses looked exactly alike as the gray fog wrapped them round. Admiral Boom's flagstaff with the telescope on top of it had entirely disappeared. I think that the Admiral's house that like looks like a ship in Mary Poppins was based on an actual park actual house in London. And you guys may remember, this is from a while ago, but I once read this book called Perfume from Provence, and just a charming series of books. Author's name escapes me right now. It'll come to me probably after I finish filming. You can tell from the title that at one point she moves to Provence, but she also wrote about when she lived in London, and I think she lived in this neighborhood, and she mentions the nautical house. So anyway, that's just a fun connection. Mary Poppins is quite severe, like when you kind of contrast her with Julie Andrews in the movie. Although I feel like partly that's because you're reading it and you're meant to sort of be in the point of view of Jane and Michael, so you sort of fear your nanny while you love her and respect her. And like Michael still backtalks to Mary Poppins. He's brave enough to backtalk, but yeah, like they talk about her withering frown, or like she'll like, snap at them. But when you picture Julie Andrews saying these retorts or delivering these, withering looks, then you kind of feel like, okay, well, it's probably not as bad as it sounds. Mary Poppins knows absolutely everyone and has connections everywhere, which is kind of fantastic. The magical visitors that she brings the children to see, like, you just get these lovely, almost philosophical descriptions. Here's one of them about Mr. Twiggly, who has some amazing music boxes. I've got a rush order that must be finished, a music box playing A Day in the Park. A day in the park? The children stared. The band, you know, Mr. Twiggly explained. And the sound of the fountains and gossiping ladies, rooks caw-cawing and children laughing, and the slow, soft murmur of trees as they grow. Mr. Twiggly's eyes glowed behind his spectacles as he thought of all the lovely things he would put into the musical box. But you can't hear trees growing, protested Michael. There's no music for that. Tut, said Mr. Twiggly impatiently. Of course there is. There's a music for everything. Didn't you ever hear the earth spinning? It makes a sound like a humming top. Buckingham Palace plays Rule Britannia. The River Thames is a drowsy flute. Dear me, yes. Everything in the world. Trees, rocks, and stars and human beings. They all have their own true music. Here's another quote I marked from the Mr. Twiggly chapter. A police officer visits the apartment, I think, at one point. Come on, stop spinning, all of you. I'm as giddy as a garden goat, and I want an explanation. Mr. Twiggly gave a gleeful cackle. You've come to the wrong place, officer dear. I've never yet made an explanation. And what's more, as I used to say to my boy, Methuselah, I don't believe in him. Anyway, charming, quirky, funny, just such a delight to revisit Mary Poppins. And I did get the box set, so I'm going to have to dive into the other sequels at some point. Oh my gosh, and I was about to tell you about Riders of the Purple Sage, which was my B-ticket ride inspired by the Frontierland Shooting Gallery, and I finished it, but my Kindle is out of battery, so I won't be able to read you any of the quotes. I did grab it as a free Kindle ebook. It's by Zane Grey. It's like one of the most popular Westerns of all time, set on the border country of Utah in the days of the true Wild West back in the 1800s. You guys may have heard me mention The Virginian, which actually it's been too long since I read that. Reading Riders of the Purple Sage made me want to go back and reread The Virginian. That actually came out before Riders of the Purple Sage. That's kind of like the original Western. I think I didn't describe it quite right in my TBR video. Anyway, I guess I'll film a separate segment on Riders of the Purple Sage because there were some fun quotes that I wanted to read to you guys. It was so exciting. I did not expect to love it as much as I did. It was definitely one of those can't put it down books. There was so much, it wasn't quite like mystery suspense, you know, where it's like, oh, who killed who or something terrible is about to happen. It was more like such a fascinating kind of set of circumstances and set of characters that you just wanted to see where are they going, what's happening next. And the landscape, so beautiful, like this, the Fields of Purple Sage, which is what the title of the book comes from, but then also like this little kind of green village in the midst of these red rocks and crazy desert, and like this incredibly intricate canyon system that one of the writers goes and explores. It was one of those stories where there are kind of two sets of action, like I'm still listening to the Timothy Zahn book, the second in the Thrawn duology, Visions of the Future. I'm listening to the audiobook kind of slowly, still enjoying it, but that one has like 6 different plot lines that you keep hopping between. But in Riders of the Purple Sage, I think the fact that there were only 2 plot lines was really effective because like one would really build and get really exciting and then stop and you'd hop back to the other one. But since there were only 2, like your attention wasn't in too many different directions. And the plot lines do intersect and kind of come back together. So yes, I will save more thoughts on Riders of the Purple Sage for when my Kindle is recharged and I can read you some more. But it is such a beautiful day, I think maybe I will go for a quick walk. I'll be back. a beautiful fall day outside. I just finished filming my reading to Cymbeline video, which I was reading, Cymbeline was pouncing as always. She's just such a pouncy kitten. I was sure she would be chill and ready to like nap, but no such luck. But I have my charged Kindle now, and I thought I might try to read you guys some Zane Grey quotations really quickly. Also, I have a book purchase to show you. So, Riders of the Purple Sage, I just read on my Kindle. I got the free version. But then I was at a used bookstore, antique store, and they happened to have, this is the sequel. This is the sequel to Riders of the Purple Sage, The Rainbow Trail. Look, it has an inscription on the inside, 1918, 1913. And look at this, the end paper illustration is just so beautiful. And of course, this is a location, I'll try not to give things away, from Riders of the Purple Sage. I don't know when I'll get to this. I have so many other books that I want to get to before the end of the year, so I feel like maybe I'll save that one till later. We'll have to see. I'll have to decide. Anyway, see, one nice thing about Kindles, it is so easy to find the passages you marked, because you can just highlight them and then you just go to notes and like there they all are. You can scroll right through them. I had quite a few highlighted here. Some of them were just short, like interesting thoughts. Tull broke the spell with a laugh without mirth, a laugh that was only a sound betraying fear. There are so many beautiful descriptions of the natural landscape. This quotation is about Jane Witherstein, the main character's home. The home of Jane Witherstein stood in a circle of cottonwoods and was a flat, long, red stone structure with a covered court in the center through which flowed a lively stream of amber-colored water. In the massive blocks of stone and heavy timbers and solid doors and shutters showed the hand of a man who had builded against pillage and time, and in the flowers and mosses lining the stone-bedded stream, in the bright colors of rugs and blankets on the court floor, and the cozy corner with hammock and books and the clean linen table, showed the grace of a daughter who had lived for happiness and the day at hand. But yes, Jane definitely needs to grow up and face some difficulties and decide whether she'll just let her community kind of bully her into doing what they want her to do, or is she really going to stand up and, you know, live life the way she wants to live it. She's not a worrier. She says at one point, I have to be made to worry. Here's a description of a sunset. Venters watched the lengthening of the rays and bars and marveled at his own league-long shadow. Wow, isn't that like quite a vision of the idea of just this shadow? Yeah, so Venters is riding into Deception Pass, into this crazy canyon system that is just so beautifully described. It must be like Arches or the Grand Canyon. I don't know if Zane Grey had a particular canyon in mind of what he was describing, or if he was just kind of being inspired by what he saw and then kind of creating one himself. Parts of this canyon are just incredibly beautiful, and other parts are just like withered and bare. At one point, this character sees some like kind of gnarled trees. There had been dry seasons, accumulations of dust, wind-blown seeds, and cedars rose wonderfully out of solid rock. But these were not beautiful cedars. They were gnarled, twisted into weird contortions, as if growth were torture, dead at the top, shrunken, gray, and old. Theirs had been a bitter fight, and Venters felt a strange sympathy for them. The country was hard on trees and men. So yes, it's difficult enough for these settlers to live out on the edge of nowhere at this time period. But then, of course, there are also lots of problems. In fact, the biggest problems created by the community. Absolute faith had been her serenity. Though leaving her faith unshaken, her serenity had been disturbed, and now it was broken by open war with her and her ministers. That something within her, a whisper, which she had tried in vain to hush, had become a ringing voice, and it called to her to wait. She had transgressed no laws of God. Her churchmen, however invested with the power and the glory of a wonderful creed, however they sat in inexorable judgment of her, must now practice toward her the simple, common Christian virtue they professed to preach. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Jane Witherstein, waiting in darkness of mind, remained faithful still. but it was darkness that must soon be pierced by light. This description reminded me of Mr. Elliot from Persuasion. She would have thought better of him if he had picked up the threads of their quarrel where they had parted. This is about a character who kind of acts like nothing had happened when they had been having a really intense disagreement, and like how Anne Elliot distrusts Mr. Elliot because she never sees any sort of burst of warmth or feeling where he loses his temper. He's always, Mr. Elliot in Persuasion is always cool and composed. There's so many situations that were just really interesting, like a cattle stampede across the open sage, and how they tried to stop it. And this one is what it was like to be down in the canyons when a storm and a great wind were going through. The gale swooped down with a hollow, unearthly yowl. It yelled and pealed and shrilled and shrieked. It was made up of 1,000 piercing cries. It was only wind, thought Venters. Here sped and shrieked the sculptor that had carved out the wonderful caves in the cliffs. How cool is that thought? It was only a gale, but as Venters listened, as his ears became accustomed to the fury and strife, out of it all, or through it all, or above it, pealed low and perfectly clear and persistently uniform, a strange sound that had no counterpart in all the sounds of the elements. It was not of earth or of life. It was the grief and agony of the gale, a knell of all upon which it blew. So yes, just really cool, vivid descriptions and such a engaging, really exciting plot. I'm so glad I read some Sangre. Definitely perfect for the Frontierland vibes, and excited at some point to check out Rainbow Valley. There's nothing like a rainy fall day for some reading. I have been really enjoying two of my Boo to You Readathon reads here, both of them children's books. I got these beautiful Puffins Classics editions. I should be careful of the raindrops. There are a few of them coming in. So I have here The Wind in the Willows and Around the World in 80 Days. Wind in the Willows was my C ticket for Mr. Toad's Beguiled Ride, and Around the World in 80 Days was my D ticket for the Grand Circle Tour, the Magic Kingdom train. I have finished The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Kenneth Grahame does such an amazing job of making these animals cozy and British with toast and tea and just messing about with boats and Toad Hall, this beautiful ancestral estate, but then also keeping them as animals. Here, for example, here's one rule of animal etiquette that we learn. No animal, according to the rules of animal etiquette, is ever expected to do anything strenuous or heroic or even moderately active during the off-season of winter. All are sleepy, some actually asleep. All are weather-bound, more or less, and all are resting from arduous days and nights, during which every muscle in them has been severely tested, and every energy kept at full stretch. Summer is really the big time for the animals. Some of these descriptive passages are just so amazing and really bring a scene to life in a new way. Never in his life had he seen a river before, this sleek, sinuous, full-bodied animal chasing and chuckling, gripping things with a gurgle and leaving them with a laugh, to fling itself on fresh playmates that shook themselves free and were caught and held again. All was a shake and a shiver, glints and gleams and sparkles, rustle and swirl, chatter and bubble. The mole was bewitched, entranced, fascinated. By the side of the river he trotted as one trots, when very small, by the side of a man who holds one spellbound by exciting stories. And when tired at last, he sat on the bank, while the river still chattered to him, a babbling procession of the best stories in the world, sent from the heart of the earth to be told at last to the insatiable sea. How beautiful is that? Here's another one about winter. It was a cold, still afternoon with a hard, steely sky overhead when he slipped out of the warm parlor into the open air. The country lay bare and entirely leafless around him, and he thought that he had never seen so far and so intimately into the insides of things as on that winter day when nature was deep in her annual slumber and seemed to have kicked the clothes off. Copses, dells, quarries, and all hidden places, which had been mysterious mines for exploration in leafy summer, now exposed themselves in their secrets pathetically, and seemed to ask him to overlook their shabby poverty for a while, till they could riot in rich masquerade as before, and trick and entice him with the old deceptions. It was pitiful in a way, and yet cheering, even exhilarating. He was glad that he liked the country undecorated, hard, and stripped of its finery. He had got down to the bare bones of it, and they were fine and strong and simple. There are no cats in this book, unfortunately, but there was one part that really reminded me of Cymbeline. It was when they were going to Mole's house. We others, who have long lost the more subtle of the physical senses, have not even proper terms to express an animal's intercommunications with his surroundings, living or otherwise, and have only the word smell, for instance, to include the whole range of delicate thrills which murmur in the nose of the animal night and day, summoning, warning, inciting, repelling. It was one of these mysterious fairy calls from out of the void that suddenly reached Mole in the darkness, making him tingle through and through with its very familiar appeal, even while as yet he could not clearly remember what it was. He stopped dead in his tracks, his nose searching hither and thither in its efforts to recapture the fine filament, the telegraphic current that had so strongly moved him. The first thing Cymbeline does in a new space is she sniffs absolutely everything. I like the way Kenneth Grahame expresses it. You do feel like we must have lost this very fine sense of perception, because obviously animals, when they smell, are, communicating. There's so much information in their sniffing and in the smells. I feel like so much more information than what we get. And it's just so fascinating and fun to watch Cymbeline and see how she perceives the world. It was really fun to see how Toad first discovers automobiles, because actually he's in the middle of another obsession. He's obsessed with carts and the idea of touring around in a cart. And he convinces Mole and Water Rat to go with him. In his brand new bright yellow cart, a automobile comes by, and there was a heart-rending crash. The canary-colored cart, their pride and their joy, lay on its side in the ditch, an irredeemable wreck. "You villains!" cried the rat. "You scoundrels, you highwaymen, you road hogs!" So Rat and Mole are horrified, but Toad says, "Glorious, stirring sight," murmured Toad, never offering to move. "The poetry of motion, the real way to travel, the only way to travel. Here today and next week tomorrow. Villages skipped, towns and cities jumped. Always somebody else's horizon. Oh bliss, oh poop poop, oh my, oh my. Now that I know, now that I fully realize, oh what a flowery track lies spread before me henceforth. What dust clouds shall spring up behind me as I speed on my reckless way. What carts shall I fling carelessly into the ditch in the wake of my magnificent onset. Horrid little carts, common carts." So Toad is very rapidly, very much on board with the car, and as you may already know from the Disney movie, it is a wild ride. He says from the outset he intends to overset carts and just be a totally reckless driver, which he is. I guess this could be considered a spoiler, so skip ahead if you don't want spoilers. Of course, I'm reading this inspired by the Disney movie and the Disney attraction, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and my most memorable experience with the Disney attraction was when my brothers and I got stuck on
it, and we had it was right at the point when Mr. Toad runs into a train, and then we had to walk out through hell surrounded by all these demons, or rather nowhere in particular, as it is called in the Disney paraphernalia. And I thought, that's so extraordinary. Is it possible they could have made that up? And actually, Mr. Toad does have a wild ride. He does get arrested. He goes to prison. He breaks out. His home gets usurped from him, and he and Mole and Badger and Rat have to form a party with guns and clubs. There's the illustration. Isn't that great? So they have to retake Toad Hall. But Toad never goes to hell. So I thought that was very interesting. That is added. I am totally going to rewatch The Adventures of Ichabod Crane and The Wild Adventures of Mr. Toad, because it's been way too long. I don't really remember the Disney movie, so I think it'd be really fun to watch that after having finished this. Sometimes I did feel like the descriptions went on for a little too long. Oh dear, this page is really getting wet. However, they were beautiful descriptions. So you didn't really mind, and especially at the end, there was plenty of action. See, I could close the window, but then you wouldn't be able to hear the rain. We'll just talk about Around the World in 80 Days pretty quickly, because I actually just started reading this, but already I've really been loving it. I love the way the story is set up. Like The Wind in the Willows, this is very British. Phileas Fogg is a member of one of the clubs, just like P.G. Wodehouse. Main characters love to go to their London clubs. And he is a very methodical person. Everything he does is like so well regulated and timed down to the minute. And yet, there's something mysterious about him. Like the first chapter is just this series of questions. Was Phileas Fogg rich? Undoubtedly. But those who knew him best could not imagine how he had made his fortune. He talked very little and seemed all the more mysterious for his taciturn manner. His daily habits were quite open to observation, but whatever he did was so exactly the same thing that he had always done before that the wits of the curious were fairly puzzled. Had he traveled? It was likely, for no one seemed to know the world more familiarly. So yes, I did not know much about this, other than that the main character, Phileas Fogg, and his manservant, Passepartout, attempt to make a journey around the world in 80 days. That's the main thing I knew. I'm only 30 pages in, so I feel like this shouldn't be considered a spoiler, but in case you want to come into it totally fresh, then consider yourself warned. But Phileas Fogg, of course, makes this crazy bet that he can make it around the world in 80 days. And actually, it is very appropriate to be reading this in October for the Boo to You Readathon, because October 2nd is when he sets off. And I think December 21st is the day he intends to be back. But after Phileas Fogg makes this bet with his friends, he leaves immediately. He goes immediately home, tells his manservant Passepartout to pack up, and the news of this bet, gets around London, and people are talking about it, and it's being printed in the newspaper, and people are arguing whether or not he can actually make it, because obviously this is during the Victorian period, so this is a pseudo-Victober read. Jules Verne is, of course, a French author, but his main character is British. Passepartout, Phileas Fogg's servant, is French. Anyway, they only have Victorian methods of travel, so train, boats, they do have the Suez Canal, they do have steamers, and if they catch each train and catch each steamer, without delay, then it looks like they will be able to make it in 80 days. But anyway, right when Phileas Fogg and his friends were making this bet, we heard that there was a big robbery that had just taken place. A couple weeks after Phileas Fogg has left, it's still the middle of October, there's a policeman who's looking for this robber, and he says that it's Phileas Fogg. And then, of course, everyone thinks, oh, well, he just, trumped up this trip around the world as an excuse so he can get off with the money. Although, is he actually the robber? I don't know. Phileas Fogg is so mysterious that at this point you can't tell. It's just such an engaging story, though, because, the concept of around the world in 80 days, can he make it on time, is interesting enough. But then you have this additional mystery of, what did motivate his trip? Is he the robber? So anyway, I'm very excited to continue following Phileas Fogg and Passepartout's adventure around the world in 80 days. Hopefully it will not take me 80 days to finish this. I am hoping to have it finished by the end of the month.
Well, I'm rather proud of my fall doorscape, so I thought I would make this my backdrop. I tried to move my rug so it would stay in frame. I feel like my outfit kind of matches. I hear just a few cicadas left, and one of them sounds like he has a sore throat, poor thing. So 2 books that I thought I'd catch you guys up on. This was my sort of Victober read, a memoir of Jane Austen by James E. Austen Lee. He was Jane Austen's nephew, and he wrote it during the Victorian era, and I feel like, especially towards the beginning, like he sounds very much like a Victorian. Some of the things he like almost apologizes for, like his aunt was wearing pattens, but those little quirks almost just add some character, and it's easy to kind of move them aside and focus on the lovely Jane Austen facts and stories that you get in this work. Either I hadn't read this before or it had been a very long time since I've read it. I have read other Austen biographies, but reading this made me realize that pretty much everything, all the facts and stories that we get in other Austen biographies came from this. Compared to other authors, we don't know a lot about her life. But then again, I feel like we know enough about her life. You read her letters. Luckily, many of her letters have survived to her sister Cassandra, and in it you get to see like the sisterly conversation, you know, the conversation she would have had with the person she was closest with. I know I called Jane Austen's nephew who wrote this Mr. Collins, but especially towards the end, I felt like, you know what, maybe I had wronged him, because you did see like that good Austen sense. You did see how much he loved his aunt and how much he appreciated her merit and her skill. At one point, the librarian of the Prince Regent connected with Jane Austen because the Prince Regent was apparently a fan of her works. And she never met the Prince Regent, I don't think, but she visited Carlton House. She visited the Royal Palace and met with this librarian. And he was very much a sort of pompous windbag. Because at the end of this, you get the letters between James and his, I think it was his sister, Caroline, and his half-sister, and they were corresponding as they like compared notes. But they were sort of giggling and laughing about this ridiculous librarian. At one point, Jane Austen says in one of her letters about Pride and Prejudice, and I think it's quoted in here, that, you know, Pride and Prejudice is too light, bright, and sparkling. Like, it maybe would have been better if she had put in some, like, historical prose or some, like, sort of, or quoted poetry or just, you know, contrasted the light with something more serious. I think Pride and Prejudice is perfect as it is, obviously. But I feel like this nephew maybe took that to heart, and so he sprinkles in all these quotations. I mean, are nice, but they aren't really relevant to Jane Austen. One quotation, though, that I thought was great that he included was actually from the Brontes. He does actually include the rude things the Brontes said about Jane Austen, which are part of the reason I can never truly get on the Bronte train. I'm sorry, I said it. But he then goes on to make such a good point. He quotes something from Miss Bronte in reply to a friendly critic who had warned her against being too melodramatic. And Charlotte Bronte says, "When authors write best, or at least when they write most fluently, an influence seems to waken in them which becomes their master, which will have its way, putting out of view all behests but its own, dictating certain words and insisting on their being used, whether vehement or measured in their nature, new molding characters, giving unthought of turns to incidents, rejecting carefully elaborated old ideas, and suddenly creating and adopting new ones. Is it not so? And should we try to counteract this influence? Can we indeed counteract it?" And James then makes the point that Jane responded in kind of the same way to that pompous librarian when he suggested, you know, a book that she should write or a topic she should write on. And she said, this is Jane Austen now, "I could no more write a romance than an epic poem. I could not sit seriously down to write a serious romance under any other motive than to save my life. And if it were indispensable for me to keep it up and never relax into laughing at myself or at other people, I'm sure I should be hung before I finish the first chapter. No, I must keep to my own style and go on in my own way, and though I may never succeed again in that, I'm convinced that I should totally fail in any other." Good job, James. Like, that was actually a great little parallel of two great authors with two very different styles, but both making the same point that you have to listen to your own inner voice and your own inner writer, your own inner muse, as it were, and follow the language, follow the direction of that voice. That's how great art is born. Another great point that he makes here, which is, I think, one of the things that makes Austen great, and obviously he shares that opinion. In regard to her novels, he talks about the fidelity with which they represent the opinions and manners of the class of society in which the author lived early in this century. They do this more faithfully on account of the very deficiency with which they have been sometimes charged, namely that they make no attempt to raise the standard of human life, but merely represent it as it was. was. They certainly were not written to support any theory or inculcate any particular moral, except indeed the great moral, which is to be equally gathered from an observation of the course of actual life, namely the superiority of high over low principles and of greatness over littleness of mind. These writings are like photographs, in which no feature is softened, no ideal expression is introduced, all is the unadorned reflection of the natural object, and the value of such a faithful likeness must increase as time gradually works more and more changes in the face of society itself. Although it's funny, I feel like, in spite of the changes of the faces of society, the changes of the hearts of men and women are not so very great, and so the portraits, the photographs of human nature that we get in Jane Austen are pretty much identical to human nature today. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why her books are so timeless. And yeah, it was really great at the end to see all the sort of additional materials. There are tons of notes. I actually did not even read all the explanatory notes. But that's always so helpful when you're like, what is he talking about? And then you can go look it up. But they included here the biographical notice that her brother, Henry, wrote right after her death. So when Persuasion and Northanger Abbey were both published after her death. So I think this biographical notice went in with that. And it's just so sweet. If there be an opinion current in the world that perfect placidity of temper is not reconcilable to the most lively imagination or the keenest relish for wit, such an opinion will be rejected forever by those who have had the happiness of knowing the authoress of the following works. The affectation of candor is not uncommon, but she had no affectation. Faultless herself, as nearly as human nature can be, she always sought, in the faults of others, something to excuse, to forgive or forget. Where extenuation was impossible, she had a sure refuge in silence. In short, her temper was as polished as her wit. But Henry is quoting here, I assume he knows he's quoting Pride and Prejudice, Jane's description of Jane Bennet. Lizzie says that affectation of candor is common enough, one meets with it everywhere. But to be candid without ostentation or design, that belongs to Jane alone, Jane Bennet. And Jane takes the good of everybody's character and makes it still better. It doesn't, and tries not to look at the bad, which I think in Jane Austen's works, she certainly looks at and represents the positive and negative of all of her characters. But there is an underlying kindness and I think just love of her characters that makes you, appreciate someone. Anne from Princess Lessons, who is my co-host for the Booty Readathon this month. It was so much fun filming a sort of 50th anniversary Disney World Booty Readathon chat with her earlier this month. But she loves Jane Austen too, so we went off on a really fun little tangent on Jane Austen. And we were saying that Austen does make characters like Lady Catherine or Mr. Collins enjoyable, like people who in real life you would just get so frustrated with and so annoyed with. I mentioned that Caroline and James, so niece and nephew of Jane Austen, were writing to each other as this memoir was being prepared, and I liked how there were a couple things that Caroline was like, let's just leave that out, let's not mention that family still lives there. It's kind of ironic because now all of those incidents are in Jane Austen's biographies, and many of them have been turned into movies. But I kind of sympathized with Caroline. Caroline says about one of the stories that she doesn't really want in the book, I should not mind telling anybody at this distance of time, but printing and publishing seem to me very different from talking about the past. And I was thinking she has a point. More about the present than the past. These days I feel like everything that happens in real life could end up on the internet. There is a difference between printing and publishing it online and just talking about it with a friend. Sometimes people act like there is no difference and you have to be totally open about everything online. I just think there are a lot of things that don't really belong on the internet, and it's just as well to leave them off of the internet. And I feel like the publishing of the memoir was like the internet of her day. Sometimes when you read like modern scholars or writers writing about Jane Austen and her letters or papers that got destroyed by her family, they're very severe and sort of judgmental and acting like the family had no right to burn any piece of paper that Jane Austen ever touched. And much as I love Jane Austen and would love to be able to see any piece of paper she touched, I feel like if she herself didn't publish it or leave, a direction to her family to publish it or to do something with it, they absolutely had the right to do whatever the heck they wanted to do with it. To them, she wasn't just an author. She was their aunt. And I know that kind of in the eyes of the world, it's like, oh, her status as an author is what endures and what we generations later can see. But I feel like in the grand scheme of things, from Jane's view up in heaven, from the view we'll have upstairs, once our life on earth is done, maybe her role as an aunt was just as important as her role as an author. And her role as an aunt, the relationships she formed with her family and the way she supported them, that was really important to her character. And then having such a strong character, I'm sure, enabled her to write as she did. Anyway, it was just an absolute delight to spend some time with Jane Austen's family, especially once I got used to James's somewhat pompous style. I think I started to enjoy this a lot more. Anyway, I was thinking this would be a short segment, and here I've been going on and on about Jane Austen. This is the Purgatorio, translated by Dorothy Sayers, who is one of my favorite authors, so it's so exciting to read her translation. I've gotten on a couple of cantos. Oh, here's one passage I marked. Then said the master, "Why should this ensnare thy wits to slack thy speed? What does it matter to thee what they are whispering over there? Follow thou me, and let the people chatter. Stand as a tower stands firm in time of trouble, nor bends its head, though winds may bawl and batter. He aims beside the mark, whose fancies bubble one on another, driving back and drumming each other out so that his eyes see double." What could I say to that, except I'm coming? Dorothy Sayers writes about the humor of Dante, and I feel like her pointing it out has helped me to see it more. Here's a beautiful description. "I ne'er saw vapors cleave their fiery way so swift through some young night undimmed of rain, or clouds at setting of an August day." Isn't that a fun way to describe a sunset? Another thing I love about Dorothy Sayers' notes is she is constantly quoting other Dante scholars, which I think is so neat. This one, I think she actually quotes this one a lot. Maybe I should go and read this next. "The Figure of Beatrice" by Charles Williams. So this is about a passage where Virgil actually is delayed. So previously Dante was being held up, but here Virgil for a moment was being held up. "It is not for Dante, Christian and capable of beatitude though he may be, to console Virgil. This certainly is one of the preludes to the in-othering, to observe everywhere a proper courtesy. The great may have their faults, but our business is to remember their greatness and not cheapen it." Isn't that an interesting thought? I feel like the fashion in today's scholarship often seems to be to just look at the faults of the great. And obviously you don't want to like sweep them under the rug or act like they weren't there. But what's inspiring about great authors and great minds of the past is their greatness. And maybe we're missing something if we spend too long focusing on their faults. I'll be continuing my journey with Dante into November, I'm sure, but I've really been enjoying both of these. So I put on an adventurous dress. I wore this at the Animal Kingdom Lodge and it looked so perfect there. It actually is kind of a hard dress to wear anywhere else. I feel like it's so much of a statement. It was one of my Anthropologie sale section finds and it just looked like such a perfect Animal Kingdom Lodge dress. It has 3 layers of pom-pom trim. I mean, I couldn't say no to a dress like that. It was also one of those dresses where the belt functions better as a headband than a belt. However, we're not here to talk about fashion. We're here to talk about some adventurous books because 2 of the books I've been reading for the Boo to You Readathon take you to distant places. So my D ticket is All Around the World in 80 Days. I'm still not quite through it, but I am making some good progress. So far, we've traveled by train, steamer, and elephant. That one was pretty exciting. Fogg, Phileas Fogg is of course trying to get around the world in 80 days, and so it's imperative that he not lose any time. And it's so funny, Passepartout, his manservant, is like trying to kind of enjoy the scenery and notice all these incredible climbs that they're going through. But Phileas Fogg is like mathematical precision. Phileas Fogg, who was not traveling, but only describing a circumference, took no pains to inquire into these subjects like the history and customs of the places he was going through. He was a solid body traversing an orbit around the terrestrial globe according to the laws of rational mechanics. He was at this moment calculating in his mind the number of hours spent since his departure from London, and had it been in his nature to make a useless demonstration, he would have rubbed his hands for satisfaction. Throughout the month of October, Phileas Fogg, as he starts his journey, goes from Paris on to Africa, on to India, and everything is going pretty well, but it looks like they're going to be getting into some choppy waters. I think the last Jules Verne that I read was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which I read for a previous Boot to You Readathon, and I really enjoyed it. I just love Jules Verne's style. I feel like he's got this kind of tongue-in-cheek sort of style that I really enjoy. Looking forward to seeing how things turn out with this, and then I have 2 e-tickets. This one is my Jungle Cruise book. It is The Last Adventure by Osa Johnson, and it's about when Osa and her husband Martin go on this incredible photographic safari into Borneo. So literally, it is a jungle cruise because they often travel by houseboat. They penetrate these like deep river reaches that no European has ever explored before, so nobody even knows what's there. In fact, they talk about how the maps that they got were not very good. Like they were like flying over some mountains, and like mountains and rivers were in the wrong place. But it's just so exciting to follow their pioneering adventure. Somebody asked me on Instagram how different this is from I Married Adventure. I Married Adventure is the overview of all of Martin and Osa's lives together. So they went to Africa, they went to the South Seas. This one is Borneo, and it also tells like how they first met, how they ended up planning these expeditions. And it's a fantastic like overarching view. But the other books like Last Adventure, Bride of the Solomons I have, which I have not broken into yet, and 4 Years in Paradise, those focus on specific trips. And it's really fun to be able to go into all the details and hear about all the packing. Osa must have been like the world's best planner and packer. Just the way she made sure they had all the provisions they needed, and the way they have to plan ahead, like, okay, where are we gonna get gas for our plane so that we can actually make it the next leg? So you hear about practical things like that, but you also hear just such beautiful descriptions, and this was describing a view from their airplane. There are few more impressive sights than Mount Kinabalu after an afternoon shower, standing jagged against the eastern sky with the silver streaks of waterfalls pouring down its steep sides. It stands out against the background of the blue sky and reflects on the black sheen of its precipices the ecstatic colors of the crimson tropical sunset. It is the seat of the mighty and the home of the departed spirits of many of the tribes. I'm still fairly early on in this book, but already Osa has had a run-in with like multiple super impressive snakes. See, so it's the perfect Jungle Cruise book because you pass pretty close to a big giant python curled up in a tree on Disney World's Jungle Cruise, and Osa does the same thing. As I was meandering through the cathedral-like silence of the rubber groves, I spotted a huge python crawling among the trees. We exchanged glances, and then after a short pause, we both took off in opposite directions. Although after that, Osa summons her courage and they go and try to find the snake because, of course, they were looking to get photos of all of this incredible wildlife and incredible scenery, and they made these amazing movies that they showed once they got back home. Osa's just a perfect fit for some sort of Disney World-inspired reading. And there's so much train travel in Around the World in 80 Days that this is a great pick for the Walt Disney World Railroad, the Grand Circle Tour. So I was just checking my camera to see if I did in fact get the shot in focus. And the reflection of the book, isn't this crazy? I guess this is why like photographers have those giant like white sheets that they just hold in front of people, because like, look at this. I should always have a book in front of me to reflect the sunlight. So yes, I've really been enjoying these here. I should leave this open just like this. My book is my video assistant, lighting assistant. So yes, once I finish these two adventure books, I will have done all 5 tickets. However, my initial pick for e-ticket, and I really want to start this. I think I still have some time, and I thought it'd be fun to save for the end of the readathon because it is the spookiest book on my list. It's my Haunted Mansion inspired read, and it is The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. It's featured in Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey. It was like a classic kind of romantic suspense novel of the Regency period. It's always been on my list to read it, and I just have never gotten to it. I'm thinking maybe I should put aside The Last Adventure and finish this up in November because it could be a good fit for nonfiction November. I do have another nonfiction November read already planned. I'm going to be rereading Letters to a Diminished Church by Dorothy Sayers. This is a collection of essays and talks that she gave. It'll be fun to be kind of simultaneously rereading Letters to a Diminished Church while I am making some more progress in her translation of Divine Comedy. Dorothy Sayers is, of course, famous as the author of the Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries, which are so delightful. This is actually part of a Nonfiction November read-along I'm doing with the lovely Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space, also Victoria, a musical bookworm, and Carla from Raised to Walk. We are going to be doing a live stream discussion on Thursday, November 18th. I'm pretty sure at 8 p.m. Eastern. Christy did a little announcement video, so I'll make sure I link that up above. I had Christy on my channel just recently. She has been joining the ranks of ARMY. She recently became a BTS fan. So I invited her to do a reaction. We ended up watching some awesome BTS Samsung commercials, and it was just such a fun time. So if you haven't got that reaction, I'll make sure I link it up above. I have not even started my Shakespeare of the month, which was supposed to be Henry VI Part 1. But again, I do have a couple days left, and it's the weekend. I feel like I often do the most reading on the weekend. So I'm definitely going to be finishing Mysteries of Udolpho and at least starting Henry VI Part 1. Well, friends, I am just finishing off my October reading vlog. Do you like my Halloween jammies? My mom had some extra Kohl's cash, and I have Christmas pajamas and Easter pajamas, but I had never before thought of Halloween pajamas. They've got like little cats, and the ghosts remind me of the ghost from the Halloween illustrated children's book, The Ghost Dinner. That is so cute. Anyway, I just realized I hadn't really done a sign off, and I wanted to say thank you all so much to everyone who participated in the Boo to You Readathon. It's been so much fun seeing videos on YouTube. I do have a playlist where I tried to collect everybody's, and of course lots of fun Instagram posts as well. Big thank you to Anne for co-hosting this year. She's posting her October reading vlog today as well, so I'll make sure I link that up above. Alas, I did not manage to start Mysteries of Udolpho yet. I was hoping I could start it so that I could, talk about it a little bit, but it looks like I will have to save my thoughts on that for my November reading vlog. I am kind of hoping to post a little Boo to You Readathon short on Halloween, and I'm also going to be doing a Animal Crossing Halloween party if you play New Horizons, and you want to come over this weekend to celebrate Halloween. I'm sure I will post the dodo code on my Insta story. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a magical day and a very spooky and happy Halloween. Bye!